So, for the past month or so, my brother and my sister-in-law have been staying with me while they wait for the sale of their house to go through. They happen to have a copy of Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. They moved out about a week ago, and they left this guy behind. I'm going to see if I can read it and finish it before they ask about it. Let's see how I do. Piranesi lives in the house. Perhaps he always has. Then messages begin to appear, scratched out in chalk on the pavements. There's someone new in the house, but who are they and what do they want? Lost texts must be found, secrets must be uncovered. The world that Piranesi thought he knew is becoming strange and dangerous. The beauty of the house is immeasurable, its kindness infinite. So, Piranesi has been shortlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction. If I were to describe it, I'd probably say it was like a mixture between fantasy and whimsical magical realism with heavy weighting on the magical, and a sort of crime thriller in feel. And I'd probably say that because you've got that whimsicality and that separation from reality that you get in like fantasy, magical realism. And at the same time you've got the sort of tension, the decoding different fragments and just trying to work things out that you've got in maybe a crime story. But you've also got the tension and worrying about the main character's sanity and their safety. You start wondering whether he's insane, but then does that really make any difference? And I thought that was quite a different thing in this book compared to a lot of other books that deal with insanity. But that is beside the point. So like the blurb said, this book is almost exclusively set in the place called a house. It's a labyrinth full of statues that feels a lot like an endless museum. Piranesi seems to have been in the house forever. He has only one companion there, a man called Other, who comes and goes periodically, and they suspect that there's a third person lurking around too. Now, what almost put me off reading this was the fact that so many people, when they talk about this book, really avoid going into detail. They don't really give away anything of the plot, and a lot of them focus on the experience and the atmosphere of it. But yeah, it did get me worried that not much was going to happen, and that made me question whether I would actually enjoy it if I did read it. But then I decided to challenge myself, given that my brother had left it behind anyway. And by the time I'd actually read it, I realised that all this vagueness was mostly just because this book centres a lot around working out what's going on based on tiny fragments and little details that come and go. So on that basis, I'm going to leave the plot description there. But I guarantee that although it's not the most fast-paced of stories, it is genuinely thrilling to read. So one of the first things that jumped out to me was about 60 pages in. Piranesi and Other have been collecting data about the house, trying to work out what it is, how big is it, what's there. And Other believes that within the house there's going to be this sort of secret knowledge that is similar to like an enlightenment that will give them powers and abilities. So this quote comes from the moment where Piranesi is sort of starting to have doubts about whether what Other is saying is actually real, actually important. So this quote said, "I realised that the search for knowledge has encouraged us to think of the house as if it were a sort of riddle to be unravelled, a text to be interpreted. And if ever we discover the knowledge, then it will be as if the value has been wrested from the house and all that remains will be mere scenery." The line, "a text to be interpreted," made me feel like I was really being told off. By this point, by like page 60, I was starting to get concerned about what was going on, whether there was any point to anything that was happening, whether it was all just going to be a load of random observations from this house. And then just as I was thinking of that, I got to this quote. And yeah, I genuinely felt like I was being told off by the author. To give her some credit, after that point I sat back and relaxed and then started enjoying it more, so, you know. But I also enjoyed the fact with this quote that it wasn't necessarily just telling you something, read and obey. You sort of got a bit of discussion on it. So there was a point where Piranesi and Other are discussing the idea of whether searching for this knowledge is worth it or of any value. And I felt like this opened up the idea for discussion outside the book. So if this house full of statues represents literature and art, yeah, it really asks the question of should we be raking it for meaning? or does that take away the value and enjoyment away from it? Yeah, and it did make me laugh, the fact that I'm reading this and I'm taking enjoyment out of pulling thoughts and ideas out of this book. So yeah, I really enjoyed the fact that it was presenting with the ideas but developing them as you went. And when I was reading about it afterwards, so much has already been written about this book, and questions are being, people are asking so many questions based off of it. And I really enjoyed reading all these articles afterwards. I've linked a few below actually that I enjoyed reading, one of which has questions at the bottom for you to look into yourself when you read it. So if you've not read it yet and you're interested in reading it, check out those questions. So even though we've kind of been told off for searching for these deeper meanings, I did really enjoy trying to work them out. And I do kind of feel like I want to go further into these things based on what happens later. But one, I don't think that's one of the main things of the book, and two, it would be riddled with spoilers. So I'm just going to move along. So there are 3 things that I didn't enjoy so much that I'm going to talk about, 2 of which actually ended up making sense, and they're the sort of thing that I think is fine to push through, and one of them, I don't know, I didn't find a sort of explanation for why it was like that satisfied me. So I'll start with the 2 that kind of had a bit of an explanation as time went on. And the first of those is to do with the relationship between Piranesi and Other. So that relationship is quite weird from the offset. It's almost like a parent-child relationship in some ways. Piranesi is very reliant on Other, which does make sense, very much makes sense based on what happens later on. But a lot of the way Piranesi was acting was very robotic, very almost like a video game character. So there's a part where Other is warning Piranesi that if he speaks to anyone else that might be in the house, that he'll go mad and he might even have to be killed. And Piranesi just kind of responds with, okay. Just okay, just like, information received, thanks, great. And it's like, surely that would have more of a reaction, right? So Piranesi does sort of reflect on his gullibility and I think the way that he responds to things later on in the book. But I felt like it was just one example of the weird way that Piranesi acts that initially just felt really, really jarring. So yeah, what made me ease up on this was actually imagining it as a silent film. So I was thinking about the actual amount of conversations that happen in this book, and a lot of Piranesi's time is spent alone. Other spends his time coming and going. He doesn't stick around. They don't have like a chummy relationship or anything. They just see each other twice a week. It's almost like a doctor's appointment. So if you're spending that much time on your own, it kind of makes sense that, things are going to be awkward and weird and you don't quite know how to respond. And that really struck home when I was reading about how Susanna Clarke was in and out of isolation because of her chronic illness when she was writing this. And it made me think about, times when I've been away from people and, you come back to having conversations and they are so awkward, you don't know what to do or say, so it makes sense to say the sort of simplest answer. And so if this was a film, it would end up probably mostly being a silent film because there isn't that much conversation. And so for Piranesi to act like that really made a lot of sense, especially when, you're living in a labyrinth with no other people for who knows how long. Yeah, it started to make a lot of sense. So the second thing that I didn't enjoy as much, but it did actually make sense by the time you got to the end, was the use of journal entries. So don't get me wrong, like the whole thing is formed out of his journal entries. It's almost as though, we've picked it up, and I think it's very much in the style of like, I don't know, like H.G. Wells and Frankenstein. I think they rely on a lot of journal entries, and I think it definitely follows in that style. Had to pause for a second. Neighbour wanted to borrow salt. 1 minute. Okay, so that's it for the things that I didn't enjoy so much but did make sense at the end. There's only one thing that I actually disliked that, I don't think it was massively explained. Or at least, the reasons for doing it didn't really satisfy me. So this was Piranesi's reaction after reading these journal entries. So for a bit of context, these journal entries are ones that he doesn't remember writing. He's not even sure if it was him that wrote them. After each entry, he takes a little bit of time, usually about a page or half a page, to go through one or two words in these entries that he just found totally foreign. And that was just really annoying and totally unnecessary. We kind of get from the whole book that he does not know much of our world, like the real world. Like, we get that. But then he just picks out words like Manchester and police station and just sort of is like, I wonder what that is. That doesn't make much sense. And it was just like, okay. I just feel like whenever that's done, like, you know, we get that you want to show that he doesn't understand these things, but whenever that's done in literature, I feel like it always just feels a bit silly and a bit gimmicky. So yeah, I just wasn't a fan of it. There are other times where I think she does this, but not in as explicit a way. For example, at one point he's having a conversation with Other, and Other says like, oh, do you know the word Battersea? And Piranesi writes it down in his journal as Battersea, and he's like, no, this is strange. I don't know what it is, sort of thing. Not like explicitly like that. Yeah, he just assumes that it's Other sort of teasing him or saying something random just to confuse him. And then later on, like chapters and chapters and chapters and chapters and chapters later, and I won't say why, but like we find out that it is indeed like Battersea in London that they were making reference to. And I feel like, to be honest, that Battersea scenario would have been enough to carry the whole book to say that he wasn't familiar with the real world. I feel like that section was done really well because you were put in the same situation as Piranesi. You were feeling confused about it too. It wasn't being told to us that it was a foreign thing. It was us trying to guess it too. Because of that being done well, I was kind of a bit disappointed whenever they'd go into these things like, I wonder what a police station or what police station is. But yeah, so the explanation was there, but I don't know, I wasn't very satisfied with that bit. But like, all that's to say, like, I really, really enjoyed this book. I rate it quite highly. I thought it has some really interesting questions and ideas, and the way that the world operates is really fun to read. I'd really recommend it as like an autumn read, or if you're interested in like dark academia, I think it definitely falls in with that. Especially later on in the book, there are some things that definitely play on the dark academia sort of trends and tropes that we know quite well nowadays. So yeah, did I complete my challenge? Did I read, finish and review this book before my brother noticed it was gone? Yeah. I mean, to be fair, I read it in pretty much 24 hours, so, you know, he didn't have much chance to notice it was gone really, but I haven't read a book in 24 hours in a long time. But yeah, if you're worried about plot, that it might not have much to it because of how vague people are talking about it, don't worry about that at all. It's more just people being vague to avoid spoilers. There is actually such a interesting, compelling and enchanting plot to this book. It really hooks you in on the intrigue and it gets your brain going to figure out what's going on. You really feel the tension, you care about this character. But yeah, I think it says so much about the writer that in such a short space of time so many people are having so many different ideas about this book that, from what I've read, like pretty much everyone comes away from this with a different sort of thing that they're thinking about. I put some of the articles that I enjoyed reading below, but I thought it was such a skillfully put together book, and I would totally recommend it. So, that was my video. But yeah, I do have other ideas, other books that I am planning on reviewing and talking about. I'm not sure when I'll get round to it. I'll try, I'll see what I can do. But yeah. So now, well, tomorrow I'm going to drop this round at my brother's house and hopefully have this video ready to show him and surprise him on his birthday. That'll be such a great birthday present, right? I could be like, happy birthday, here's the book that you already bought, and look, I did a video for it. Oh, nice. Cool. I'm just gonna drink my drink. It's the kids across the road coming home from school. They're getting out of their car. Maybe I could just pretend I'm on Zoom.